Hello and welcome. It's our Confessions podcast. Yes, it's another one. A collection of the trials and tribulations of the discerning Radio 2 listeners. And while you're listening, I think you should be considering this question. What should I confess now, before it's too late? This week's concise collection includes a holidaymaker horror, a palmistry prank, a cranky Canadian, and a marathon misdemeanor. It's all coming up. But the all-important question is, who will you forgive? Speak now or forever hold your peace. As they say, here they come. Dave sends in tonight's confession. Thank you, Dave, dear Father Simon, and the Wise and Wondrous Collective. I place at your figurative feet a tale of rage and revenge, bluster and baggage, and general skullduggery that has weighed heavy on my shoulders for several decades. The scurrilous episode took place when I was plying my trade working for a well-known tour operator. As a poorly paid holiday rep in Europe, I worked hard topping up sangria glasses and generally having fun. Occasionally I was actually called upon to work. This work was dealing with the odd gripe from one of the 150 or so holidaymakers under my charge, who wasn't happy with the hotel or view or flight or weather or food. Usually a quiet word with the cute receptionist or maybe the maître d' was enough to solve any problem that arose, and the customer would scurry back to the pool and continue to enjoy their holiday. It turned out that I was rather good at my job, and after several seasons I ended up in the lofty position of airport manager. This extremely senior position required many hours of toil at the airport, getting our sunburnt passengers on an aircraft that was vaguely pointed towards the UK, and then ensure that the new passengers were met by the heady cocktail of a smiling rep and shiny bus to whisk them off to their Shangri-La. As you would expect, I also had to spend a fair amount of time at the resort office, filing reports and generally being the wise old sage to the teenage reps. One day I found a young fragile rep called Sarah, who was no more than 19 years old, in the corner of the office, quietly weeping. She was being consoled by a gaggle of older and more experienced colleagues. Sarah had a particularly unpleasant customer staying at her hotel who had taken issue with the room that he had been allocated. I can't remember what exactly was wrong with it, but he had shouted and screamed sufficiently to reduce poor Sarah to tears. As the hotel was full and he couldn't be moved, resolution of this cataclysmic problem was not possible, and he demanded to speak to her superior. Later that day, the resort controller was dispatched to the said hotel to meet with Mr. Angry, but returned in a similar state to poor Sarah, sobbing and shaking after being confronted by this obnoxious man. So it was with trepidation later that day that I was dispatched to meet with the horrible holidaymaker and to try and make the peace. Mr. Angry was himself the epitome of the enraged and apoplectic aggressor, eyes bulging, sweat glistening on his brow, dark patches under each armpit and white socks and sandals at the end of his sunburnt legs. Nice picture. We've all been on holiday with people like this. He stood defiant, almost daring me to do anything other than upgrade him and his unruly mob to the nearest and most expensive five-star palace in the vicinity. You'll be pleased to know that I fell back on years of experience and did not back down. The rest of the week saw more complaints and problems from Mr. Angry, who clearly thought that the very best way for him to enjoy his yearly break was to ruin everyone else's. He was even overheard boasting about how he had managed to reduce 2 reps to tears. Well, Saturday was departure day, and my airport shift was several hours old when I saw Mr. Angry arrive, porter in tow, striding purposely towards the check-in desk, blatantly queue-jumping, looking forward to his return flight to Manchester. Amazingly, he didn't appear to recognise me as he started barking orders at me about what to do with his baggage. And that was when my cunning plan was hatched. Having spent most of the season at the airport, I knew most of the check-in staff very well. So it was with reasonable ease that I arranged for a special check-in desk to be opened just for Mr. Angry, and with deft professionalism, a boarding card was produced. He was, of course, loving every minute of it as he looked scornfully down on those people that had to actually queue for their desk. "Careful with my bags, young lady," he bellowed. "My work manuscripts are all in there. I've been working on those for weeks. Careful how you go now, my darling."
What?
Always endears when you talk like that.
My darling. Yeah.
What he didn't know was that the previous flight that checked in at that desk was departing for Reykjavik, and that on top of the desk lay a pile of baggage tags for that most northerly of destinations. The look of confusion in the eyes of the check-in girl almost gave the game away as I calmly reached over to the wrong pile and handed her the tag marked RKV rather than MAN for his luggage. To her credit, though, she didn't question me, and Mr. Angry wandered away happily, having been given what he thought was the royal treatment. A warm ripple of pleasure ran through me as the tannoy announced the departure of the flight to Reykjavik, knowing that Mr. Angry's bag would be holidaying with its reindeer-skinned cousins that summer. And what of his oh-so-important work manuscripts? Well, maybe he lost those. How very sad. So I begged for forgiveness, not from Mr. Angry, of course, but from my previous employer, that will have to foot the bill to reunite him with his baggage. The company is no longer trading, so I do hope that my little attempt to get revenge for Sarah and all the other poor resort staff was not the final straw that broke its financial back. The temptation to know that that pile has got Reykjavik tags and that pile has got Manchester tags, you can imagine, was pretty overwhelming. And so I suspect maybe we'd have all done the same, but let's see what the righteous Sister Rebecca would have done.
This probably happens rather a lot, don't you think? That check-in staff who get annoyed with passengers send them to the wrong place, send their baggage to the wrong place.
Or maybe
I
send
reckon
them
it
to the wrong
happens.
place,
Or maybe
yes.
send them to the wrong place, exactly. Mr. Angry sounds like a horrible person.
Yep.
I mean, I can't stand people with a sense of entitlement like that.
And white socks.
And the White Sox. Well, it was what decade was it? Anyway, I think he deserved it, and also he didn't learn the lesson. You know, never annoy people on the check-in desk, never annoy the holiday rep. So, Dave, you are forgiven.
Yes, I think that pretty much is going to be. You may well have spoken for the nation there, Rebecca, but
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. No one's coming down on the side of Mr. Angry at all.
Well,
are
you
they?
might have done.
Well, no, I'm not going to. I mean, apart from anything else, be careful with my manuscripts. What? It's paper. What's going to happen? Nothing's
it
going to
might be
happen.
an important script.
Well, yes, but it's paper. That's all it is. It's not going to break. It's paper.
Well, it might be lost. It might be a special document.
And also, this reminds me of why I never complain. I know I should, and even when it's really bad service, I don't complain.
Really?
So I hate these kind of people who think that, oh yes, look at me booking the system because I'm able to shout at someone and make them cry. No, you're not. However, the reason I'm not going to forgive here is that for revenge to work, you need to see them crumble. And he didn't, you know.
Well, he may well have done, but later.
Yeah,
It
but
was
no,
an
he's not
investment.
there as he's waiting at Manchester Carousel and seeing that his luggage isn't there and then finding out that it's in Reykjavik. And I think for revenge to work, you need to see them crumble, and he didn't, so I'm not going to forgive him.
Okay, Deadly, the Archdeacon, the Venerable Deadly, is with us.
Yes, indeed.
With an
Yes,
occasional
indeed.
visit.
A pleasure.
Here's tonight's tale. It comes from Carol. Thank you very much indeed, Carol with an E, in case that matters. Dear Father Simon and the collected counsellors, back in the 90s, my husband, Ray, ran a diving centre in Greece. Every April, we'd head off down to the Ionian Islands and spend 6 months working 7 days a week with British tourists who wanted to try diving for the first time. Ray and I would head back to Blighty at the end of October, and each winter I was fortunate to get temporary work in the expenses department of a consulting firm. One winter, Ray advertised for diving staff in the local paper and took on 2 new chaps, one of them named Carl. Carl used to work down the pits at one of the coal mines, and when I mentioned this to my colleague, Adam, at the company I was temping at, he said he knew him because he'd worked at the same pit in Yorkshire in the payroll department. Adam was full of praise for Carl and told me he used to have 2 beautiful Alsatian dogs, that he used to live at the junction of 2 roads, and that he could also remember Carl's payroll number from when he worked at the pit.
Wow.
This is all very relevant. A bit strange, you might think, but he explained that each employee would have known their payroll number like you'd know your car registration number. An idea was growing in my mind, but as we say these days, I parked it for the time being. I finished at the temping job in April, and my husband and I headed off to Greece for the next summer season, greeting our 2 new members of staff and letting them settle into the very busy but thoroughly enjoyable job of working with new divers in the warmth of the Ionian Sea. After a month of working every day and socialising in the evening, we got to know Carl very well, and I remembered these snippets of information that I'd learnt about him. One evening, whilst the whole dive team were having a drink, I mentioned to Carl that I could read palms. Well, he was obviously very sceptical about this, but I assured him that it was a gift I had and asked him if I could look at his palm. He reluctantly put his hand on the table, and taking it in my own, I began to about the lines that I could see. I mentioned a few things that he knew that I knew about, just to get warmed up, then said, I can see 2 things to do with Germany. but I couldn't quite make out what they were. He looked blankly at me, obviously unconvinced by my pantomime. I took a dramatic pause, and then I said, I'm seeing 2 dogs. 2 dogs, maybe? Wow. He suddenly looked impressed. He said he'd once owned 2 German shepherds who were very dear to him, but that they'd passed away a few years ago. What else can you see, he said. I'd hooked him in. Well, I took a moment, still holding his hand in mine, and then, with a dramatic, oh...
Do that again.
No, that's probably a little bit...
It was a bit.
It was too
Just
camp.
once more. No, go
then
on,
with a
once more.
dramatic... Oh.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Is that Dennis Williams lives?
I went on with my charade.
Yes.
I can see 2 lines, I said, and one is more significant than the other. They meet at this point, though. I pointed at his hand. This shows me where you might have lived. Again, Carl was quite impressed, and I could see he was intrigued by my abilities. I closed my eyes and rubbed my thumb on his palm, and then with a whisper I said, Yorkshire.
Brilliant.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like you would.
Of course you would, yeah.
His eyes widened so much I thought they were going to pop out of his head. Wow. He was buying every single word of this, so I decided to use my last piece of information to seal the deal. Looking carefully at his palm, I said that I could see 4 numbers, and they were quite significant in his life. I intentionally got them the wrong way round at first, but then I stopped, built up the tension for good effect, and came out with his 4-digit ex-payroll number from when he worked at the pit. This is Darren Brown stuff. To say he was gobsmacked was an understatement. He told me that no one would ever have known that his number, that was his number, and how on earth could he get that from his palm? He wanted me to carry on reading, but fortunately my husband, who'd been standing there watching all this, stepped in and said I was looking very tired, and that I should stop as it would be far too draining for me to carry on that night. Readers of energy like this can tire very quickly, he said. I think my wife needs to rest and recharge her psychic batteries now.
Yeah. Carol's had a bit to drink.
Well, you do, don't you? If your psychic batteries are worn out.
Yeah, no, that'd be right. Yeah.
Carl was very understanding and went off telling people about what I'd done. For a few weeks afterwards, I had to avoid his requests to read his palm again. Carl bought some books on the subject and studied palmistry himself so he could learn some more. Became quite the expert, actually, resulting in him getting a tattoo, which declared, "The love fairy sees all and knows all." Nice, huh?
There you go.
So, I'm asking for forgiveness from Carl. It's all my fault that he got interested in this thing and got an interesting tattoo. I've not seen Carl for many years, but always thought he was a great bloke to work with. And if he's listening, he'll know it's about him. I'm very sorry, once again, for winding him up. And he thought it was all in his palm. Yes. So it's Carol's confession. Now, what do we think, Sister Rebecca?
I think it's brilliant. I mean, good on Carol for doing that, and also for getting the numbers the wrong way round. You know, the first time, and then correcting them. I mean, that is such a good charade.
It is exactly what a magician or a conjurer would do. Oh no, I've got them in the wrong order. And then
I would love to have been able to do that. So, Carol, you are. I mean, the tattoo, obviously, of the love fairy is slightly going over the top for poor Carl. But because you did it so well, you're completely forgiven.
Yeah, me too. I agree with that. Can I say that?
No, I haven't introduced you yet. Venerable
You said I was here. You said I was
Venerable
here.
Deli, what do you think?
I thought it was superbly executed. No harm was done, really. And the tattoo, you can get those removed eventually, can't you? What's wrong with the love fairy? Come on.
Well, the love fairy knows all and sees all.
Yeah, apparently.
As I think we have all learned in life.
So forgiven
from you, okay.
Forgiven, absolutely.
Brother Matthew, what do you think?
It is great showmanship to be able to get the numbers mixed up and then go, oh, no, is it the other way around? And I see here something on your hand that says Yorkshire. Brilliant. Superb. Well done. Oh, is it just because the 2 lines? Yeah, 2 lines coming together always means Yorkshire. Means Yorkshire.
In fact, looking at my hand, I was born in Yorkshire too.
Brilliant, yeah. And, so was I.
Wasn't that about the roads meeting? Do you remember?
Yeah.
It's the high street, though, in York.
No, absolutely, that's the reason why. But the other thing that I love about this is that it comes up with a payroll number, but nothing that he could actually use. None of this was going to be, oh, right, that's information for my life. It's just, here's a place where you live, here's the dogs that you've got, and here's your payroll number.
Lottery numbers would be useful.
Am I likely to get another job? No, I can't give you that. What I can tell you is your payroll number from 10 years ago. Brilliant, thanks very much.
Gary Barlow's got 2 oil stations. I'll just throw that in.
That's why you're a valuable part of the collective.
Outstanding. Yeah, I'm not going to forgive.
So tonight's confession here, well, we've already had one. So it's from Beth. Thank you, Beth. Dear Father Simon, in the ever noble collective. As I swiftly approach the birth of my first child, and having spent far too long on maternity leave waiting for it to arrive, I've had time to reminisce about my fun and happy-go-lucky youth. In doing so, I remembered a catalogue of behaviour which took place many moons ago during my time at university. I arrived in my first year bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, eager to learn and keen to make new friends. After waving sobbing parents off from the somewhat shoddy digs, I quickly settled in and met the boy next door. He was quietly spoken, had long hair, a leather jacket, massive speakers, and fancied himself as a modest sort of rock dude who was super cool because he was Canadian. In fact, I soon learnt that he wasn't. He read physics, drank a well-known creamy Irish liquor, used very expensive conditioner to keep his long locks soft, and was actually born in England, having never been to Canada, but I digress. As the term went on, it transpired that said rock dude was desperate to please some of the, how shall I put it, less savoury characters from our digs, and would spend hours playing soft rock on his massive speakers into the night, keeping me awake into the wee small hours. I would be polite to rock dude when I saw him, and being the big-hearted, quiet country mouse I was, I sort of felt sorry for him that he didn't appear to have any proper friends. Well, as the year went on and we all made new friends and planned where we'd be living in the second year, it transpired that rock dude had no one to live with at all. He pulled on my heartstrings, telling me how he would be lonely, isolated, and miss out on the great university experience in the following year if he couldn't live with us. Well, what should he do? I was a sucker for a sob story, so I sort of suggested that he might move in with us. Us being me, the bloke who's now my husband, and 2 others, all of whom were completely exasperated with my suggestion, especially me, having put up with a year of loud, soft rock music, unsavoury visitors, and nasty smells coming from the room next door. I'm afraid to say that Rock Dude was not popular in the house, mainly due to his loud music, wannabe rock credentials, and the fact that he insisted on leaving a full bag of apples in the fridge when there simply wasn't room for the 5 of us to share one fridge, and his insistence on being Canadian. He would often crave traditional Canadian fare, such as eggnog and waffles, that had to be made properly with the correct quantities of nutmeg and cinnamon, and would spend hours making a mess in the kitchen, perfecting his recipes. It quickly became the butt of most of our pranks, born out of boredom, in the way that students get from time to time. It started out innocently enough, with my now husband and I hard-boiling his eggs and putting them back in the fridge, waiting until he next made his eggnog to see how confused he became when they wouldn't crack, and indeed the eggs came out of the shells whole. He thought that they were just off, and we managed to stifle our giggles enough to agree. He was surely a culinary genius. So next we decided to swap all his spices over, and in particular transferred his nutmeg into his cinnamon jar, and his cinnamon into his nutmeg jar. As he raved about having found the perfect balance for each spice for his eggnog, we congratulated him and giggled at his stupidity for not knowing the difference between the two. The worst came, however, one night when we were really bored and spied an unopened bottle of a well-known creamy Irish liqueur in his room while he was out one day. Hoping to have a little tipple, but obviously not wanting to break the seal on the bottle, we came up with a cunning plan. We put 2 tiny holes in the cap, one for the air, and after some time holding the bottle upside down, we enjoyed a drink on our housemate. Some time passed before he actually opened the bottle and was completely confused as to how it could be at least half empty. We convinced him that it must have been done by the shop that he bought it from, so he took the bottle back, trying to explain to an incredulous checkout assistant that he had only just opened this new bottle and it was half empty, and he'd certainly not drunk it himself. Needless to say, she didn't believe him and probably thought he was mad. His rock clothing of REO Speedwagon t-shirt and no shoes didn't help him here. Calling security, he apparently then spent a few hours explaining his theory to store detectives, and when they refused to believe him, he broke down and wept. Which is always a great thing to do. He was sent away and banned from the national supermarket chain as a result. Who, they said, would go to such lengths to embarrass a friend? Well, who indeed? Despite Rock Dude asking if we could maintain the living arrangements for the following year, and so clearly being oblivious to our behaviour, I was nominated by the House to tell him that we didn't really feel it was in anyone's best interest for him to remain living with us, and so he moved out. In my defence, he's now a very successful man, lives with a real girlfriend, abroad, not Canada, having obtained a PhD, and therefore I feel we may have done him a favour in the long run. So forgiveness, please, for my sins as I rapidly approach a more grown-up chapter of my life, that being motherhood, and as I contemplate the high probability that my husband and I have created a geeky child who may well find him or herself in Rock Dude's position one day. I quite like Rock Dude confessions, really, and I particularly like the creative use of the Irish liquor, although that was basically theft, and they were setting up this guy by suggesting that he go back to the supermarket, where you can imagine it will cause a little bit of a scene. What do you think, Sister?
I think students, I mean, swapping spices. How rock and roll can you get there? I think Rock Dude sounds a bit strange because he thought it was super cool to claim he was Canadian. I don't really get that at all.
Well,
I mean,
I
do you
agree.
get that?
I
Really?
think Canada is cool.
When did that happen?
What?
I just think it is. I think if you're
Oh.
Canadian, you're in here. I agree with that.
What? Why?
I think so.
I don't
No.
get that at
I
all.
think so.
Not
It's
at all.
kind of American, but with a little bit of Britishness.
Have you ever been to Canada?
No, I've never.
Okay.
Right,
I'm not going
fine.
to say anything else. Anyway, I think you
Let's hear it for
sounded kind of
Canadians.
annoying. So I think, Beth, you were completely right to torment him in a gentle kind of a way. And you're forgiven.
You're a right comfort. You are.
Oh, what I don't get about the Canada thing is, does he have an accent? Is he, because he's not Canadian, so is he talking in
Maybe
a
he
Canadian
put one
accent
on.
the whole time?
Quite a tough thing to do. Respect to Rock Dude.
Clearly, Rock Dude, the new Mike Yarwood. Well done. Well, you know, it is
a topical TV reference.
There you go. Yeah, that's one for the teenagers. Well, speaking of teenagers, I mean, when we were teenagers, we all do things and act in a certain way, particularly when you go away to college and you want to be seen in a certain way, so you act in a certain way that perhaps isn't the real you. So that's not a crime. However, keeping all of your apples in the fridge. Well, who needs to keep the apples in the fridge? There's no point in that at all. And also, not wearing any shoes. Sorry.
Round the supermarket.
That's not in the Rock Bible at all. You get to wear boots.
REO Speedwagon t-shirt.
REO, what's that about, by the way? So for that, for the apples, the shoes, and the REO Speedwagon, I am not going to forgive.
And here's tonight's tale, which appears to be anonymous. I have no name at the end of this at all. So let's just say it's from... Give us a name.
Anonymous.
Bernard.
Bernard. OK, it's from Bernard. Dear Father Simon and the collective good people of Radio 2, I've had guilt, pains for nearly 5 years about this. It's a terrible thing I'm about to divulge, but my question is, what would you have done? My sorry tale goes back to a time when I was working for a commercial broadcasting supply company. Whatever one of those is. I was a partner in this company and was proud of our standing within the industry. I had a business partner at the time who all the staff called Sir Walter. He wasn't knighted, but he carried himself with such an air of elegance and sophistication that the title suited him to a T. Sir Walter was already semi-retired when he bought into my fledgling business, still worked as a consultant for companies all over the world. My story starts when Sir Walter was commissioned to do a review for a massive company in Mumbai, in India. He duly went over for his 28-day trip. Wow, imagine that. And before leaving, asked me if I'd ever been to India, to which I said no. He said that it would really be a life-changing experience and I should come over for the last 2 weeks and take in all the excitement and hospitality of this extraordinary city. So off Sir Walter went on a trip and left me to run the company in his absence. When the day came to fly out myself and join him, I was a little apprehensive, but with visas in place I arrived at the airport. It was when I was queuing to get on board my flight that the troubles began. I was confronted by a giant womble, an 8-foot-tall polar bear, and a 9-foot green dinosaur, with a collection of buckets in hand and a sticker on the buckets advertising the charity they were raising money for. I suitably put £1 in the bucket as I was called forward by a very pleasant young lady who inquired with a nice smile, "Where are you going today, sir? Are you going far? My reply, which I thought was just light-hearted banter, was, "I'm running away, far, far away from," and then mentioned this charity in question. I was just chuckling to myself. I thought it was mildly funny. I was a little confused by what she said next, which was, "Oh yes, a few of your mates went out yesterday." Well, I thought no more of it until I came to board the plane. My seat was right at the back in economy class, so I was not in any great rush to get on board. As I went to hand in my boarding card, the nice man at the gate said, "Ah, Mr. Woodward." Oh, anyway, it was Bernard Woodward, that's who it was. We've been expecting you. And then, to my surprise, went on to say that, unfortunately, it was impossible for me to fly to Mumbai in economy class, but it would be a pleasure to be upgrading you to first class, upstairs. With a massive smile on my face, I thought Sir Walter had worked his magic, and this was a special surprise. So, for the first time in my life, not only did I not turn right to join the normal class, I was ushered upstairs, where I was shown my chair and bed complete with the divide. As I was quaffing the complimentary champagne, I was shown a fantastic menu, and I was licking my lips, selecting the lamb shank, and was delighted with the lovely stainless steel cutlery. This is the point when things started to go wrong. The stewardess said, Oh, you're one of the team who's running in the marathon in 2 weeks, aren't you? At first I said, sorry, and she repeated her statement, qualifying it that a group of famous fundraisers had just flown out just 24 hours earlier, and I was one of them. Well, what was a man to do? I was worried that I may have had the glass taken out of my hand and the food scraped into the bin, so I just said, yes, that's me, something like that. Anyway, she smiled and she said, well, we're very, very proud of you. They thought I was a world-famous athlete. Instinctively, I pulled my stomach muscles in and sucked in my cheeks, and then I put the bed into the full recliner mode and listened to some music before watching a film. Every moment I was awake, the ladies kept coming over to me and saying, I know you shouldn't be doing this, but would you like some more champagne? To which I agreed. I'd say, well, it doesn't quite fit in with my training, but okay, just this once. Well, if the story ended there, I would have put it down to misinformation and an error from the checking girl, but Father Simon got worse. Just as we were about to land, the stewardess came round and said they'd made another mistake. A look of shock rushed over my face. She said, no, when packing away the bar, we accidentally left this bottle of vintage champagne out. Would you like it? The whole crew would like me to take it away and perhaps celebrate after your last run, raising all that money for all the poor people. I protested and said this really, really wasn't necessary, but they insisted. Worse still, as I was getting off the plane, the lovely stewardess gently held my arm and said, I know it's not much, but we've had a little collection for you, and we've put some notes in an envelope. And then I got a rather nice kiss on the cheek from the aforementioned stewardess. Well, I didn't know quite what to say other than, no, I couldn't possibly take it. Please pay it in when you get back to the UK. I would hate to lose it. Anyway, every step I took down the stairs as I left the plane, I felt a complete fraud. I still felt a fraud in the limo.
What?
And I felt a fraud as I sipped more free champagne. Anyway, after meeting Sir Walter, I just had to tell him about my fortunate upgrade, and he said that the flight would have probably cost me at least another £1,500 if I'd paid for it myself, and that the only way I could live with my future would be to make a sizable donation to the charity in question. So I need forgiveness. I need to tell you, though, first of all, that when I came home, I did indeed pay £100 of my own money to this charity, and I signed up to run a marathon. But I still feel remorse, and more importantly, would like forgiveness for taking the kisses and the free booze from the lovely stewardess, and for giving the impression that I was, after all, and despite all the obvious evidence, a supreme athlete. So he took the upgrade, and he drank the champagne, and he went swanning around in the limo. What do you think about the fraudulent upgrade?
What's so bad about this story is the contrast between the idea of somebody raising money for charity in Mumbai and the fact that he was just a total fraud, drinking this champagne.
But what would you have done? Would you
absolutely, that's the thing. And also, probably I would have, the fraud would have begun and you go, yeah, that's fine. And as it continued, there's no point at which you could exit, is there?
Actually, I'm not an athlete.
Yeah, you just can't. Once you're in the limo, when do you do it? Once you're in the hotel. So I can see how he found himself being drawn into this thing without a way out. And I'm glad he gave money to charity afterwards. And
he did penance.
And he did run for charity, didn't he?
Yes.
So I don't think the stewardesses would have cared.
No.
And I don't think he took anyone else's seat, did he? So I think I'm going to forgive you, Bernard.
Bernard Woodward appears to be forgiven by Sister Rebecca.
Yes. This is amazing, isn't it? To go from giving £1 to a guy dressed as a dinosaur to you get to be first class. How does that work? Because the woman saw him and he makes a comment and therefore... Oh, right, in that case, have all of our champagne. Amazing stuff. I think Rebecca's absolutely right. The fact is that once you've started down the lie, just keep lying. Keep lying, because there's no point in trying to get out of it. However, I have a massive problem with people who turn left when they get on the airplane. Should be going right with the rest of us. What makes you think you're better than me just because you've paid more money for your seat? Well, I don't think you are any better than me, and frankly, the meals aren't that much better either.
How do you know?
Well...
You went there once, didn't
okay,
you?
Once.
What a hypocrite.
Yes, but yeah. Okay, well, I've done it once, and it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it, because I am man of the people, so therefore always turn right, getting on the plane, and for that reason I am not going to forgive.
You got mistaken for a marathon runner when you turned left. That was weird.
Yeah.
It's a vintage champagne. I mean, it did, and they gave him a bottle as well.
A lamb shank.
Yeah, the worst bit I thought was when he said he got the notes in the envelope, and I thought he might have walked off with those. But the fact that he gave them back to them, that was all right. But he started off with a good deed. He gave money to charity in the bucket to the dinosaur and the wombat.
Karma, couldn't it? Good karma.
Or womble even. Yes, a vintage karma. I like the idea of that.
Never let your karma run over your dogma.
No, hey, very good.
I've said that before. Look, I say it regularly. There's lots of things I've said before.
I think we don't always
Get on with
remember
it
the
anyway,
other
we're
ones.
late
But
now.
anyway, old Bernard right on Woodward, well done to you.
Yes.
And for signing up for the marathon, he didn't say he gave him money to charity when he signed up for the marathon, but I'm sure he did. I thought he's done a brilliant job. And
Right.
£100, so I'm massively forgiven.
They were the confessions for this week. Who did you forgive? You let us know when you send your own confession. You've had plenty of time after all. Confessions at bbc.co.uk, that's the email, or you can go via the website. More next week.